I'm Alana and welcome to another episode of Button Bash. The original Bioshock is an absolutely fantastic game and it just came out on iOS. You could even call it Bioshock if you're feeling crafty, which I am, so let's go with that. Now I played it on an iPad, though you can also play it on the iPhone, but I would definitely recommend the iPad if you're going to play it on one of these devices, though whether I'd recommend doing that overall is a bit of a different story. For those who haven't played Bioshock at all, or for those who just want to take a trip down memory lane with me here, like the original, the iOS version is a beautiful game, just maybe not as much. It's a first-person shooter set in 1960 in an underwater city called Rapture, which is chilling, confusing, gritty, and amusing all at once, and everyone ought to experience it. Admittedly, the Bioshock has suffered some graphical downgrades from its original. It's still fantastic for a phone or tablet game, but even simple things like a reduction in shadow does hurt the atmosphere, making the game noticeably less uninviting. It looks like an iPhone game, what can I say? That said, the city is based on Ayn Rand's philosophy of Objectivism, where in the game one man tried to create a utopia in Rapture that holds true to those ideals. The philosophy of Objectivism in itself is honestly fascinating, but we're not here to talk about that. Instead, I just want to highlight the true depth of Bioshock, that it's rooted in a philosophy that explores morality above all else, and the story mimics that with a chilling irony instead of just being all about the shooty gunsy bits. That depth feels kind of out of place on an iPhone though. Bioshock is an engrossing cinematic experience. Leaning all over a little screen and fumbling with touchscreen controls kind of takes you out of the experience a little bit, and it feels a little shallow. I'm sorry, I'll stop. Looks-wise though, fancy glass hallways still show off the glowing foreign city spanning across the depths of the sea, and only text and faraway objects suffer particularly badly at the expense of iOS being jagged and kind of rough around the edges. The frame rate tends to drop whenever it pleases too, but at least the audio is still on point. Rapture might even be welcoming if it weren't for the eerie sound of creaking water through aging pipes, the shadows of masked madmen seeping from dimly lit rooms, and the pompous voices of the deranged drug addicts in the distance. Oh yeah, regardless of good intentions, almost everyone in Bioshock is completely insane after a sea slug called Adam that can rewrite DNA was discovered and sparked a civil war, and the city itself is more than a little busted. But beyond what I've already said here, I'm just not even going to talk about the story because it's such a damn masterpiece. It's the same in the iOS version as the original. So let's chat gameplay. The basics: you have some regular first-person shootery kind of weapons to fight against the Atom addicts called splicers that inhabit the city, as well as some other miscellaneous jerks. You do also have plasmids though, which are basically powers that can be shot from your hand like a mage shooting a spell. Mixing weapons and plasmids together is fairly important to your survival, but it is a little awkward on iOS, which is a particularly large problem because sometimes the combat just feels tedious anyway. Most of the missions are just go here, find this over and over with some extremely repetitive fights that just throw enemies at you in some of the least interesting corners of the city when you, or maybe I, would just prefer to be exploring and observing instead. And that also existed in the original. And hey, maybe calling it a little awkward on iOS is an understatement. For me, combat sequences became nearly unplayable. Trying to look and shoot during fast-paced, occasionally overwhelming combat is such a struggle on a touchscreen, but that's not even the worst of it. Trying to cycle through the inventory or even just use a medkit is extremely touchy, and knowing your inputs are probably going to be misread half the time just makes the experience so stressful, not engrossing or atmospheric. That's mostly because the game doesn't actually pause while you're doing any of these things. The action keeps going and you're going to die a whole lot as a result of that, but it's not your fault, buddy. While I love Bioshock and I really do appreciate that this is exactly what it says it is, an iOS version of the original game, it's probably only worth playing if you're interested in the premise and don't have access to a console or PC to play it on instead. It's not the kind of game you want to play while you're waiting for your train in the morning, and I really don't want it to be the kind of game that you dismiss because the touchscreen controls are so frustrating, but at its core it's still that same chilling Rapture experience that everyone should try. Maybe just try playing it with one of the iOS compatible controllers if you have access to one, or, you know, just stick with the consoles. It's for your own good. The iOS version of Bioshock is currently available in the App Store and can be played on Apple's iPad Air, iPad mini with Retina display, iPad 4, iPhone 5S, iPhone 5C, and iPhone 5 running iOS 7.1 and higher. I'm Alana, and thanks for watching Button Bash.